Hey folks, Matt Wilson with BTB Security here on April 1st, April Fool's Day, back for this week's edition of BTB Reacts. An article came out yesterday, which was an update to some prior research out of Google related to a focused attack on security researchers. I wouldn't classify myself as a security researcher, but as an information security professional that works at a company that has some security researchers, surely this stood out back in January when the first article was released, and here again yesterday. So let's jump right into it. So I shift screens here. So this is an update. This is the update, I should say. And Google's threat analysis group is calling out a focus campaign where they're trying to proactively hack a state-sponsored group is targeting security researchers. And essentially, the update is a bit more information in detail about the how this was working, and not so much about the why, that's unknown. When I see things that are related to nation state actors, or clients ask us about nation state actors, this is a real threat. But I caution folks to be mindful of how real that threat is to their situation, their organization, who they are, what they have. We've had a number of attacks over the years that have focused on higher education space, in healthcare space, technology, legal, and it doesn't stop in one area just because another area is highlighted, right? Just because healthcare might be in the news of later, in this case, security researchers are in the news, it doesn't necessarily mean that other groups aren't being targeted at the same time. I'll include links to both articles, this one, which is the update article, and the original, which I'll show here in a moment. But the real takeaway here is that there are nation state actors that are putting on some fairly elaborate schemes in an attempt to do what I'll there is targeted elements of this, but it's effectively a watering hole attack. If you've ever heard of that, where people will come to this space, whatever it is. It might be a website, it might be some content you send in, and you're just hoping that they're vulnerable. You don't necessarily know that they are unless you have a 0 day, which in this case, there was a number of 0 days in Chrome, potentially is what Google's referencing. And when you invite people to visit this watering hole where you know or hope that they'll be exploited, then that's when you can kind of plant your bad guy hooks in and do your bad deeds. So in this particular case, the elaborate scheme involved looking like you're another fellow security researcher and inviting other actual researchers to participate in some research. So they had a Turkey-based company that offered penetration testing, security assessments, and exploits, which is actually, believe it or not, a fairly standard set of offerings. While BTB doesn't necessarily offer exploits, it is something that we do leverage from time to time to do our offensive work, that is, the white hat side of the house. I'll jump to the original article, because I think it's a couple other takeaways that I want to highlight here that show how elaborate this scheme was. There's a number of LinkedIn profiles, Twitter profiles. These are potentially some bot activity, like automated messages and responses, but for sure there is some hands-on people with a brain thinking about what messages they're crafting and who they're interacting with and how they're trying to interact. So highlighting this, again, because there's nation state actors that are involved. This is real. It happens on a somewhat regular basis, unfortunately. But if you're an organization out there and you're building your security posture or maturing your security posture, I wouldn't encourage you to put this as the top risk of your organizations unless you truly are the international organization with your hands in a lot of things and a lot of sensitive data and higher profile, or you're a governmental entity or something along those lines. Maybe there's regulatory requirements that bring this kind of risk forward. But what we see a lot of times is folks rush to address very specific niche risks like this, though damaging. And by all means, these folks have targeted smaller organizations, lower profile organizations. I'm not being dismissive of this risk. But when I hear advanced persistent threat and I hear nation states, they absolutely impact organizations. You can see it here. This is a great example of an advanced persistent threat that is very focused, very smart, and has some pretty devastating attacks that they've been successful with. So not to, again, diminish the threat for all organizations, but having that strong basic security architecture where you're patching and hardening and monitoring, it wouldn't have protected folks here. If someone's going to whip out a 0-day, it's going to be hard to completely prevent every ill effect from that. But when you're doing good monitoring, when you have a strong security posture and a good architecture, you're going to be more resilient against any kind of attack, whether it is an APT, whether it's ransomware, whether it's a nation state, whether it's just a phishing attack. So, wanted to highlight this. Hopefully this was useful to folks that might not have heard of this story. Again, I'll drop links to it. It's pretty creative, what was done both back in or reported back on January and have been ongoing, and then again highlighted yesterday. So hopefully that's useful to folks. Again, please, subscribe to us, like us, share us around. We're on all the social media accounts. We have all kinds of social media accounts, and looking forward to connecting with folks next week.